She weighed 4 pounds and fit inside a soldier's boot, and while men with medals on their chests were celebrated for their courage, she was crawling through 70 feet of pitch-black pipeline with bombs falling overhead, dragging a communication wire that would save 250 lives, and nobody wrote her name in the history books because she had fur instead of a uniform and loyalty instead of a rank. Smoky was a Yorkshire Terrier found in an abandoned foxhole in the jungles of New Guinea, sold to Corporal William Wynne for £2 Australian, and for the next 2 years she became the smallest war hero nobody talks about. The one who didn't understand medals or glory, or why the ground kept exploding. She only understood one sacred thing. Wherever he went, she followed, even into hell. Even through darkness so thick you could taste it. Even when every instinct in her tiny body screamed to run the other way. You know what that feels like, don't you? That pull towards someone even when the world is on fire. That irrational devotion that makes you stay when everyone else with any sense is leaving. That bone-deep loyalty that doesn't ask questions or demand explanations. It just shows up day after day. Even when showing up means walking through your own fear with nothing but love as a compass. You've been that person. The one who stayed when it hurt. The one who showed up when it cost you something. The one who loved someone through their war even though you were bleeding too. And maybe nobody gave you a medal for it. Maybe nobody even noticed. Maybe you've spent years wondering if your loyalty made you a hero or just a fool. If your devotion was strength or just inability to leave what you should have abandoned. Smoky didn't know she was small, didn't know that a 4-pound dog had no business being in a war zone, didn't understand that the pipeline she had to crawl through was so narrow that grown men couldn't fit, so dark that she disappeared completely the moment she entered. So long that she'd have to drag that wire for what must have felt like an eternity to a creature whose entire world was measured in the distance between her and the man she loved. They tried everything else first. Tried to dig up the entire airfield to lay new communication lines, tried to send engineers through, tried every logical solution that made sense to human minds operating with human limitations. And then someone looked at this tiny dog who never left Wynn's side and thought what everyone thinks when logic fails. Maybe love can go where reason can't. Maybe devotion fits through spaces that courage is too big to enter. Maybe the answer isn't in being strong enough, but in being loyal enough to stay small and still move forward. And here's the truth, nobody tells you about loyalty like that. About the kind of devotion that doesn't calculate odds or measure risks or wonder if it's worth it. It doesn't feel heroic while you're doing it. It feels like the only option. It feels like breathing. It feels like there's literally no other choice because the alternative is abandoning the one thing that makes you you. And Smoky entered that pipeline not because she understood strategy or warfare or the 250 lives hanging in the balance. She entered because on the other side, somewhere in the darkness, she could hear Wynn's voice calling her name. And that voice was her North Star, her oxygen, her entire reason for existing in a world that made no sense to a 4-pound creature who should have been sitting in someone's lap. Not saving an entire air squadron from enemy fire. 70 feet of absolute darkness. 70 feet of pipeline so tight she couldn't turn around, couldn't back up, couldn't do anything but keep moving forward with that wire in her mouth. And if she stopped, if she got scared, if she decided that this was too much for something so small, the whole mission failed. Men died. The airstrip stayed vulnerable, and all because a dog couldn't be braver than her fear. But she was, not because she was trained for it or bred for it or naturally inclined toward courage, but because at the end of that tunnel was the person who mattered more than the fear, the person whose voice made the darkness less dark, whose presence made the impossible feel possible. And so she dragged that wire through hell and came out the other side covered in dirt and trembling and absolutely transcendent, not knowing she'd just saved hundreds of lives, only knowing that she'd gotten back to him, that the distance between them had closed, that she'd answered his call the way she always did, with everything she had. You think your loyalty doesn't matter because it's quiet, because it doesn't come with parades or recognition, because you've been showing up for people and causes and commitments that never made you famous, never earned you applause, never gave you anything but the satisfaction of knowing you didn't quit when quitting would have been easier. You think because you're small in the grand scheme of things, because your impact feels limited, because you're not the obvious hero in anyone's story, that your devotion doesn't count, that your faithfulness is just background noise in a world that celebrates the loud and the large and the obviously impressive. But Smoky proves something that war always proves eventually. Size is a lie. Visibility is a lie. The ones who save the day are often the ones nobody sees coming, the ones small enough to fit through the impossible spaces, devoted enough to walk through the darkness, loyal enough to keep moving when every logical voice says, turn back. She spent the rest of the war with Win, jumping out of planes, alerting soldiers to incoming fire, visiting wounded men in hospitals and making them smile when smiling felt like betraying their pain. And when the war ended, she didn't get a pension or a military funeral or a statue in the town square. She got to go home with the man she'd never stopped searching for. The man whose voice in the darkness was always enough to keep her moving forward. And maybe that's the real reward of loyalty. Not the recognition but the return. Not the medals but the continued presence of the person you'd crawl through hell for. The knowledge that your devotion wasn't wasted. That the one you stayed for is still there, still calling your name, still worth every terrifying step into every impossible tunnel. The military gave her 8 battle stars and awarded her the title of Best Mascot in the Pacific Theater. But those are just words on paper. Titles that try to measure something that can't be measured. Because how do you quantify devotion? How do you put a rank on love that walks through fire? How do you medal loyalty that doesn't need medals to keep showing up? The real award was simpler and more profound. She lived, he lived. They made it through together, and in a war where so many didn't come home. Where so many bonds were broken by bullets and distance and death, they got to keep each other, got to grow old together, got to prove that sometimes the victory isn't in the glory but in the survival, not in being celebrated, but in being together when the smoke clears. So when you feel invisible, when your loyalty feels thankless, when you're wondering if anyone notices the 1,000 small ways you show up and keep showing up even when it costs you something, remember the 4-pound dog who saved 250 lives by simply refusing to let darkness or distance or danger come between her and the voice calling her home. Remember that the heroes who change everything are often the ones small enough to slip through the cracks, quiet enough to go unnoticed, devoted enough to keep moving when everyone else has given up. Remember that your size doesn't determine your impact. Your visibility doesn't measure your value. Your lack of applause doesn't mean your loyalty didn't save someone's life in ways you'll never fully understand. Smoky died in 1957, 14 years after the war ended, and they built her a monument in Cleveland, a tiny bronze statue of a dog in a soldier's helmet, and every year people leave flowers there, people who never knew her, people who just heard the story and felt something break open inside them, some understanding that heroism isn't always loud, that courage sometimes has 4 legs and weighs less than a bag of groceries and saves the world one terrifying tunnel at a time. She didn't need to understand war to survive it, didn't need to be big to be brave, didn't need recognition to keep showing up. She just needed one voice in the darkness, one person worth crawling toward, one reason to keep dragging that wire through impossible spaces. And that was enough. That was everything. That was the entire definition of hero condensed into 4 pounds of fur and absolute devotion. You are not too small to matter. You are not too quiet to be heard. You are not too ordinary to save someone's life with your loyalty. And the world doesn't need more people who are impressive from a distance. It needs more people like Smoky, who fit through the spaces where logic fails, who move toward the voice they love even when the path is dark, who prove that the greatest acts of courage often come from the smallest hearts beating the loudest.